different story. I thought I fancied a challenge. And I actually came across a podcast that spoke about this topic. And it made me aware of how important the beginning of a story is. If you think about it, when you start a book or you start watching a movie, those first few minutes grab you. And you decide whether you're going to watch this or not. Is this going to grab your interest? You meet some of the characters. The scene is set and you start to get the theme. And for me and for everyone in our belief, one of the most important stories is the story of Moses and how he leads the people out of Egypt. But there's a beginning to that story that God thought was important enough to put in his word. And that's the story of the 7 women who saved Moses. Before he's a prophet, before he's a deliverer, they are instrumental in bringing about God's plan. And they are very different women. They're not from the same race. They're not from the same age group. Some of them are nameless. And yet they are instrumental in saving the people of Israel and getting them to the promised land and preserving the bloodline that we now worship as the Messiah.
Sure.
So it's a beautiful story, and it's not just that these women are amazing. It's the whole story is done as almost a little bit of a thumbing your nose at Pharaoh, because Pharaoh determines on genocide, and God uses a few pairs of women to stop him. Women who are counted as less than a camel are used to stop this man who thinks he's a god when he tries to overthrow God's own plan. So this is the story of the 7 women who saved Moses. My story today begins long, long ago. It's set in the land of Egypt. Now, it's about the family of Abraham, but they didn't originally come from Egypt. They are not Egyptians. Abraham was called out of the city of Ur by the one true God to set up his own land and his own nation in the land of Canaan. And the family multiplied and grew. Then a famine came to the land, and they moved to Egypt because Jacob's son Joseph had ended up there, and he was second only to Pharaoh, and he saved the Egyptians from the famine. But he also saved his own people. So the whole tribe moved to Goshen in Egypt, and centuries passed. Jacob, Joseph's father, died, and his body was carried back to the land of Canaan. But the children didn't think to leave. They were comfortable there in the fertile valley of the Nile, so they stayed. They kept to their ways, they worshipped their God, and centuries passed. And pharaohs came and pharaohs went, but a new Pharaoh came to power. A Pharaoh who didn't see value in this tribe, he saw threat. In his defense, at the time, the Hittites to the north are threatening to invade. And his fear is that these masses of Hebrews will join with his enemy and he could be defeated. So he has looked at these people who are virile and strong. They have swarmed across Egypt. They are filled with life and they multiply just as their God told them to. And he fears them. But his fear is limited. His fear is limited to the men because Egyptian bloodlines are carried through men. And if he could wipe out the men, they won't be able to join the army of the Hittites. But women, who cares about the women? Women, there's no threat. They're harmless. They're just to be used. So first he starts a policy of enslavement. And slowly he removes the rights of the Hebrews. Suddenly they're working for nothing. They're working to avoid the whip and the staff. They are not rewarded in any way. And they are used to build the monuments for Egypt. But no matter how offensive this king becomes, no matter how he suppresses them and puts them down, the Hebrews continue to thrive. They are filled with vigor and life, and they do everything with vigor, and they continue to have children. And so Pharaoh decides he has to take a more radical action. And he devises a plan that can wipe out the whole nation in one generation. And he summons 2 Hebrew women to his courtroom. He summons Shiphrah and Puah. And he says to them, women who produce babies, women who can't have their own children, so they are dedicated to bringing life into the world. And he commands them, as the God of Egypt, when they wait on these women, the Hebrew women, and help them deliver babies, if it's a boy, they must kill it. Don't worry about the girls, they can live. I have no fear of the women. But if it's a boy, you kill those children. And Shiphrah and Puah stand in that courtroom, saying nothing. For if they defy Pharaoh, he will simply have them killed. And when they leave, together they make a pact. They fear the God of Israel more than they fear this fake God of Egypt. And they determine in their hearts that they will not kill for him. So when the Hebrew women go into labor, they go at night, quietly, under cover of the dark, and they sit with them, and they labor with them, and they breathe with them. And when their child is delivered, and they place that baby in the mother's arms, and when those words are, it's a boy, they don't. They quietly remove signs of birth and disappear into the night, silent, covered, hidden. But Pharaoh starts to notice that the population is not declining. And he summons them before him again. Why have you not done as I have commanded? And the women look at him and they say, well, these Hebrew women are so vigorous. They're not weak like the Egyptian women. Often they deliver way before we get there, before we can get there and actually take on the children. So what can we do? They are filled with vigor. And strangely, the Pharaoh does nothing. He dismisses them and lets them carry on with their work. And at this time, there's a daughter of Levi, a Hebrew woman. Her name's Jochebed. She's married to Amram, and they have 2 children, Aaron and a young girl, Miriam. And she falls pregnant. And when her child is born, the midwives come to deliver her in the dark of the night. And when they place that child into the mother's arms, they see it as a boy. And they let him live and they leave, risking their own lives. They leave into the night. And Jochebed looks at her son, and he's good. And her husband determine that they will save this child. And Pharaoh in his courtroom has realized these Hebrew women are not going to conform. So he makes another plan. He sends out a decree to all of Egypt, saying, you Egyptians, if you see a Hebrew boy, you pick him up and throw him in the Nile to drown. And this evil is being perpetuated all around Jochebed. Babies are being thrown into the river to drown, and the parents cannot save them. Enslaved children don't want clothing, so it's very easy to tell it's a boy. And Jochebed determines in her heart she will preserve this life. So she swaddles him so you can't see. She stays indoors. She keeps his cries quiet. She keeps his life hidden. But babies don't understand. And at 3 months, he's wiggling. He's wanting to crawl. He's wanting to sit up and move. And it's impossible to keep his life a secret any longer. So Jochebed makes a plan. She takes some papyrus and she weaves it into a little ark. And then she uses pitch and tar to make it waterproof. And she makes a small little lid to close it over. And she gives it to her young daughter Miriam. She's about 6 years old. And she carries this little basket as Jochebed picks up her baby boy, and they walk to the river Nile. And she takes this little living child, she kisses his face, and puts him into his little ark. And gently she puts the lid on, and she kneels at the water's edge, and she places this vessel onto the Nile River. And she releases her boy as she gently pushes it out into the Nile. Jochebed stands with tears pouring down her face. She turns to walk back to Goshen, her arms empty and useless. And the dust kicks up and it sticks to her cheeks. And she prays that Almighty God will make a miracle happen, that her son would be spared. Young Miriam doesn't follow. Young Miriam's arms are empty too, and her little head is hot in the sun. But she stands and she watches her beloved brother in his little ark, floating, bobbing along down the Nile. And her little feet follow as she watches her brother. She stands slightly hidden to see what will happen. For Jochebed is no fool. She's put this little ark where the Egyptian women come to bathe. They come because the river Nile is a sacred place. They come to cleanse. They come to be sanctified. And they come to be fortified. So Miriam watches. And the sand's so hot she's shifting her feet to alleviate the pain. But she's not leaving. While her brother is in the river, she stays. And then a dazzling white comes down, and she can see it's Egyptians coming to bathe. What's going to happen to her brother? Egyptians kill baby boys. And as she watches, she sees the sun sparkling off their jewels. This is no ordinary Egyptian party. This is a royal party, with slaves walking out in front, carrying the royal linen. It is Pharaoh's own daughter coming to bathe. And the slaves come down first and they scan the river, making sure that there's nothing dangerous for their princess. And then they wait, not far from where the little ark has got lodged in the reeds. And young Miriam watches, and she sees the princess walk down. She's close enough to see the black kohl around her eyes, the sharp fringe defining her. She sees the princess get to the water's edge and scan where she wants to get in. And her eyes fall on that little tova. And she points with an imperious finger for a slave to go in and fetch it. For the reeds are dank and smelly, the princess doesn't go there. And the young slave girl gets into the water and she gently guides that little boat to the princess's feet. And Miriam watches as the slave girl picks it up and walks out the water, the Nile running off her elbows as she holds the ark up to her mistress. And she watches as Pharaoh's daughter peers with those black eyes and opens the lid. And as she does so, the light must wake the baby. He starts to cry. And Miriam's eyes are glued to Pharaoh's daughter's face as she watches. Her look of curiosity turn to one of compassion. She says, "It's a Hebrew boy." But her face isn't hard. She doesn't take the basket and throw it back into the river. Her father has ordered every Egyptian to take them and throw them in, and yet here she draws a Hebrew boy out. And Miriam's little heart's pounding in her chest, and her little skinny legs are shaking as she walks to stand just a little closer to where the princess is. She says, "I can find you a Hebrew woman to be a wet nurse." And the princess's eyes don't leave this child's face as she looks at him and she says, "Yes, I'm going to keep him. I will call him Moses, for I drew him from the water. Go and fetch the wet nurse." And she lifts the baby from the basket and holds him in her arms. And little Miriam's legs fly. She runs. Her mother hasn't even reached Goshen yet. And together they race back. And the princess is holding this child and says, "You have milk. I will pay you to nourish my son." As Pharaoh dehumanizes the Hebrews by refusing to pay for their labor, his daughter reaches into his purse to pay for the life of the Hebrew boy. To his own mother, And Jochebed returns home, her daughter skipping at her side, this brave little soul who's reunited her with her own child. He has the protection of the princess and the provision of Pharaoh. Jochebed's heart sings praises to God as she holds that child close to feed him, as she gazes at that beautiful face and she feels that his little fingers hold hers. God's grace is good. Pharaoh's plan of genocide, undermined by a pair of midwives, by a brave mother and her daughter. And the child grows, healthy, strong, nourished like a prince. And eventually, Jochebed has to take him and release him to Pharaoh's daughter. And she does this, and Moses grows up in a palace, a prince of Egypt, educated, fed, and clothed by Pharaoh himself, a young Hebrew slave. And he grows in politics, he grows in knowledge of warfare. He's a mighty soldier, being prepared to rule. And then one day, he goes out and he sees a Hebrew being brutally beaten by an overseer, the whip stripping flesh from this man's back. And he remembers those lessons from his early days. These are his people. Without thought, his anger rises and he kills him. And he looks around, no one's seen, and he buries him in the sand. 4 women have risked their life to save him. And his first action as a man is to take life. And he returns to the palace thinking no one's seen. But word gets out. You cannot kill an overseer, even if you're a prince, under penalty of death. So he has to flee from Egypt. He has to flee, leaving his life behind, leaving his Hebrew heritage, leaving his Egyptian adopted family. He flees out into the desert. And perchance, he comes upon a well. And at this well are 7 women. And these 7 women are being harassed by tribesmen who won't let them let their flocks drink. They're shepherdesses. All they want is to roll the stone and feed their flock water. And these men won't let them. And he's a trained soldier. So he arrives and he gets rid of these tribesmen and single-handedly removes the stone so they can water their flock. And they go back to their father, who's a Midianite, Jethro, who's a priest. And they tell him, and he says, bring him. And he comes, and Jethro invites him to stay. And as often happens when you meet a man at a well, a marriage happens. And he marries one of Jethro's own daughters, Zipporah. And maybe Zipporah and Jethro in this new community help him establish, who is he? Is he a Hebrew, or is he an Egyptian? Is he a slave, or is he a prince? But under their loving care, he returns to being a man, to being a father, a husband, a son-in-law, a shepherd. And he spends decades taking care of his father-in-law's sheep, learning how to care, learning the desert, how to navigate through, finding water, finding grazing for his flocks. One day, he's near a mountain of God. And at this mountain, a bush starts to fire up and is not concerned. And God calls him to remember his people in Egypt and set them free. Go back to Egypt. And Moses 5 times says no, giving 5 reasons why he can't. And it makes me wonder, those women never needed to be told. They never argued. They did what was right. Moses took a little more convincing. But eventually he agrees. And he collects his wife Zipporah and their 2 sons. And he heads towards Egypt, where God has said that he will be the mouthpiece of the Lord. And as hard as Pharaoh's heart becomes, God will act until they let his people go. And when they're on their way, one night, they've set up camp shelter right beside the road. and Yahweh himself appears. And he wants to take Moses' life. Maybe because that's what Moses had done, a life for a life. And the Midianite, Zipporah, grabs a flintstone and she quickly runs to her son and she circumcises him. And she takes the bloody foreskin and she puts it at Moses' feet. Doing what Hebrew circumcised Moses never did. Marking her son as in covenant with Almighty God. And as God sees her heart and her action, he gives Moses a reprieve. She has saved his life. And her words, you are the bridegroom of blood. Foretell of what will come when they get to Egypt. For it is the same words of touching the blood is used in the 10th plague, when God is both justice and Savior. For as they touch the blood to the doorposts, the angel of death spares the Hebrew girls. And Zipporah is a foreshadowing of that. A non-Hebrew had the foresight to stand between God and Moses. And you know Moses' story so well. How he leads the people. How he becomes a prophet that we today speak of with reverence and respect. But Moses' story could not be without the 7 women in the beginning who saved his life at birth and as an adult through courage and bravery. And it's like God's way of saying, Pharaoh, you think women and girls are useless and not to be feared. But my seed comes through the seed of a woman. And these women flout his pan. They stop a genocide. They're Egyptians. They're Midianites. They're Hebrews. They're from 6 years old to we don't know how old. Their bravery should be commended. And how God is prepared to use us, regardless of race, age, or ability. Just step into your calling, because he has a mission, so you can help bring his kingdom to earth, just like they did. That's the story.